We will have some time for questions that you want to directly ask Maggie at the end of this presentation.
Well, thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm really grateful to be here, and just to kind of wave the flag and help give other options to students who might need other options, because it's not for every kid, right? But when you hear some of the opportunities available at different countries, you're like, oh, I know exactly who this would fit, or it's just nice to know that there's some other options for some students that might not quite fit the mold. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background just so you know who I am and what I'm up to and what I plan to do for this session. I'm really reactive to you guys. So if there's specific things that you want to make sure I cover, please pop it in the chat. I can't see the chat, but these guys are going to monitor it for me, and just let me know if there's anything I haven't hit. But I have done this for a very long time, so I hope this overview will at least give you kind of the blitz of information you need. And then if there's anything else that you need, I'll make sure there's time at the end for us to chat. But yeah, so as Christine said, I'm Maggie. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm actually the daughter of a guidance counselor, so very much grew up with this in mind and with a mom who worked at a very rural school fighting the fight to get kids to consider higher education, whereas I was beating down the door and going through all the FIS guides and everything at an early age to try to find my university. So there were no resources for international, or very few resources for international at that point. So I'm glad that I get to kind of help on this side of things. I did my undergrad in the US at Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia. But I studied abroad in Wales when I was 20, and I'm a weirdo with Wales. I must have been born here in a past life. I read a series of books when I was 8 that took place here, and I just had to live here. So I came over for a semester, had the best semester of my life, studied King Arthur and Shakespeare and cathedral music, and did homework in castles and learned the Welsh language, and almost transferred to finish my undergrad here. But I went back and finished my undergrad, but then came back to Bangor University for my master's in English Lit, focusing on Arthurian literature. And then my PhD is super geeky. So if anybody wants to geek out about film adaptation and fantasy literature, I studied Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Hunger Games, and specifically adaptation and fan engagement. So that's my academic life, is like a whole lot of that. But this life, I then worked for Bangor University for a very long time, more than a decade. I think it was 13 years. And then I worked, and that was admissions, recruitment, partnership development, study abroad, anything in North Central and South America. And then I worked for Global Wales, doing the study in Wales profile. So if you came on any fly-in tours, that was me. Or came to any sessions at NACAC, IECA, HECA, any of that, I would present for Wales. And then I went independent in 23 and started doing consulting and worked for the British Council as the North America Specialist Consultant out of the UK Embassy in DC, for a year, and also did some work with the Marshall Scholarship and the Fulbright Scholarship. So there's my background. Moving into the UK, which is probably more of interest for everybody here. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I think, is just kind of not blow through, but like make sure I cover a real clear overview of why this is attractive and how this works for students. And then any questions at the end, give me a shout. And I'll also do a little bit of a UCAS workshop. I'll just share a couple of slides to talk about the application process and procedure with you. But any point, if there's anything that comes up, just pop it in the chat or feel free to interrupt me. I'm pretty informal about these things. So UK, I mean, the main reason I considered it was location. Obviously, I was obsessed with Wales. I wanted to live here, but I think that is a highlight for a number of US students or international students considering. I tend to work specifically with US students, so apologies if I reference back to that. But for any student, location is very attractive, academics and cost. So those are the three main points that I want to make sure I cover. Location, you have a lot of choices. Obviously, there's London, that's what everybody has heard of and knows about, but there are a multitude of options outside of London as well, excuse me, which are a lot more accessible and super affordable. You have city, suburban, and rural campuses. You have tight-knit campuses that are kind of like the US model where you can walk from one end to the other. You have city campuses where there are different buildings throughout the city. I lived here for 9 years without a car. I mean, transportation anywhere outside of the US is great. So transportation is fantastic in the UK. Buses, trains, all of that was very easy to access. So living up here, I live in rural North Wales. This is the backyard of my last house where literally ponies came to my window to like eat carrots and apples out of my hand. Like it's just surreal and ridiculous. But I taught in London every Monday. So I would commute down to London and take a direct 3 hour train, teach 2 classes, and then come home. So very possible to live in these rural, beautiful, affordable places. I was on the ocean in the mountains. I am on the ocean in the mountains of Snowdonia National Park, but I can get to London in 2 hours and 58 minutes on a direct train. And where I live is 70% cheaper than London. So it's quite nice to be able to access all of that, but not have to live in all of that. I was very much attracted by the history, the culture, the castles, the sense of adventure that comes with international education, but having that kind of supportive network that if I got homesick, if I didn't know how to do something, if I needed to extend my visa, there was a huge support network able to help me with that. And I will go through what some of that support looks like as well. Academics were super attractive. They're shorter, they're more focused, there's no gen eds. You do need to know what you want to study. I'll go into that in a minute. But I liked that it didn't make me take French. It didn't make me pay $5,000 a credit for a gym class. You know, you're really just focused in on your academic focus. And every degree is equivalent to a US degree, except some of the certifications. So I'll go through that as well. And then the main thing that attracted me was the cost. Schools that I was considering in the US, I mean, this was 15 years, 20 years ago, guys. This was 20 years ago that I was considering schools in the US. And even then, they were like $48,000 to $55,000 a year. And the school I went to was $11,000 a year. And after scholarships, I was paying $6,000. And it was a FAFSA school, so I could get US federal loans to pay that. So yes, I ended up in debt, but I ended up about 30 grand in debt at the end of a PhD. And I got to live in Narnia, so I didn't care. So that was fine. Things that are also really attractive to students and advisors is the application process. You can apply directly to universities. The application is on their website. It's free. It goes specifically to the university. Some of them are on the Common App. I think there's about 40 schools on the Common App now, so that is another option. But every institution is on the UCAS. So if your student is applying to more than one program, I say program because you could apply to 5 programs at the same university. That still counts as 5 applications. You should use UCAS, and UCAS is capped at 5. So that sounds a little bit terrifying, especially to the US students that are applying to like 20 universities. Like, how on earth are they supposed to choose just 5? The difference is how transparent things are in the UK. You can email a country rep at an institution with your transcript and say, I want to study this. Will I get in? And they will say yes or no. So by the time you're actually filling out your application on UCAS, you're applying to 5 programs that you know you're going to get accepted to. Like maybe 1 or 2 are a little bit of a reach. Like maybe you have to get a certain score on an AP test for that specific thing or something. But the goal, especially for the clients that I advise or the students I work with, is that you have 3 to 4 solid, yes, unconditional offers. We will accept you before they even complete the UCAS application. I'll go through that in a bit as well. So just how it looks, it is structured a little bit differently. The academic year is divided into 2 semesters. It's pretty similar to the US one. We start a little bit later and we end about the same time. So we start the end of September. Students arrive, usually international students arrive first, and they have 3 days of just orientation just for them. How to open a bank account, how to get a doctor's appointment, how to get a job. So all that stuff that seems really scary to first-time students overseas, it's only the first time for them. Like the universities are a well-oiled machine at helping international students be successful in living overseas. So they'll pick them up at the airport. They'll bring them back to their dorms. They'll help them carry their suitcases up the stairs. Also, all of our dorms are single accommodation. So like, I don't know of any that are shared. You will have some dorms that have shared bathrooms, but everybody has their own bedroom. So that tends to be quite attractive to American students. And then those first couple of days are just like, where do you buy your peanut butter? Which phone plan is best for the US? Like all the important things that students worry about this first few days. And then everybody else shows up. And then you have a normal freshers week where you sign up for clubs, you have tours of campus, you learn how the library works, and then school starts. You have a solid week before you have to really adjust and engage to being a full-time student. And then you have 2 to 4 weeks at Christmas break. And then we start up again the end of January and have a 3-week break at Easter and finish usually around early to mid-May. Students are welcome to stay through the summer. They can work full-time during school holidays and summer break. Easter break was always a lot of fun. I tended to meet my family in different places all over Europe because you get this 3 week break and they took it as an excuse to travel. Christmas, I usually went home. Summer, I usually went back to the US, but I spent 2 summers over here interning in the international office, which is how I got my job in the international field. So similar structure in terms of school year, different structure in terms of degree. So in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, it is a 3 year subject specific focused degree. That means that on your application, you are applying to a specific major. They're called courses or programs over here, so the terminology might be a little interchangeable, but you're applying to specific areas of study. And like I said, it might be 5 at the same institution, but usually it's 5 different institutions, the same area of study. Now, that kind of freaks out American students. I will say you have to know what you want to study. You have to know the field you want to get into. You can change. I mean, if you start with clinical psychology and you want to switch to neuropsychology, sure. The first year of a psychology degree is pretty much the same for everybody. That's doable. If you start with clinical psychology and you want to switch to ocean sciences, you're going to have to start over. Because it's a set 3 year program, there's no getting into classes, force adding, begging to get into a required element. If you're accepted onto the 3 year program, you will finish in 3 years. There's no impacted courses or anything like that. So the difference with that is that you do need to know what you want to study. You don't need to know what you want to do with your life, though. I think that's a really subtle but important difference because you're going to be introduced to what those things are while you're studying. There's loads of industry experiences, internships, things like that built into British programs. So while you're studying, you get exposed to the actual field. A lot of courses will even offer a year in industry after the second year. So they're fully paid full-time jobs, and then you come back to finish your 3rd year. And the statistics for employment for that group after their 3rd year is like 98%. Their grades go up. They have this incredible experience working in the field and then are very well qualified to be hired straight out of those programs. So they figure out how things can work professionally while increasing their academic abilities. So they have to know what they want to study. They don't have to know what they want to do with their lives. There's also ways that you can combine these degrees. So a lot of our American students and a lot of international students plan to do a 4 year degree in the 3 year institutions. Stay with me, because they're doing a 3 year degree for a bachelor's and then a 1 year degree for a master's or an MBA. So in 4 years, you can get your master's degree, including MBAs, whereas obviously in the US that takes 6 or 7 years. So a friend of mine, as an example, he did his undergraduate degree in music. Great pianist, brilliant musician. And then he did a 1 year MBA. Now he manages the choirs at Liverpool Cathedral. So you can kind of find these ways to combine these different areas of interest within your own, passions and build an academic program that supports that. Scotland is a 4 year program. So Scotland, the US system is modeled after the Scottish system. So there is a little bit more flexibility. You are choosing a degree area when you apply to a Scottish university, but the actual specific subject is chosen at the end of the second year. So you do have a little bit more flexibility to start broad and then go deep. Okay. Cost was the main reason I stuck around, and definitely a main reason that folks seek us out. It is still expensive. It's still an investment in your education, but it is significantly cheaper than a lot of the options that are comparable in the US. So tuition, even for the top institutions, ranges from 18,000 to 30,000 average. There will be a few programs that might be up in the 40 to 50 range, but there'll be specialist programs from competitive areas at competitive universities. But it's down to specific subjects. So there are different tuitions at a single university depending on what you want to study. But the average cost is $18,000 to $30,000 per year. It is generally a low cost of living in a lot of areas. Every time I go back to the US, I'm floored by the cost of groceries, especially recently. And it's just not like that here. I mean, I have a husband and a kid and a dog, and our weekly shop is about 50 pounds, which is just absurd compared to the things that I was spending on a US vacation. NHS is also included, which is our national healthcare system. So full-time students do have free healthcare. And in Wales, prescriptions are also free. In Scotland, England, and Northern Ireland, it's a £10 copay when you need a prescription, but everything is free and included within that for full-time students. There are a lot of scholarships available as well. Individual institutions will have scholarships, pretty much always merit-based, based on your GPA. But they also accept a lot of scholarships. So Rotary scholarships, Idealists, Lions Club, things like that usually don't have country restrictions. There's Fulbrights, there's Marshalls. So lots of international scholarships can apply to study in the UK. And like I said, there are a lot of universities on the FAFSA and GI Bill. And you can work part-time while you're a student, up to 20 hours a week. And then during holidays and breaks, you can work full-time. Living over here and life abroad, like I said, there's a lot of support for students, and I don't think that's immediately apparent. The main difference, I would say, is that the students coming over here need to be independent and advocate for themselves. So I will get to student profile in a second, but all these things are here, and I found them not like, I don't want to be like crazy propagandy about it, but so superior to the experience that I had at my US institution. And I had a great US institution, I'm not putting it down, but it was so easy to access all of these things. There was no stigma attached to any kind of learning difficulty or anything like that. But you had to advocate for yourself. So finding the office, booking the appointment, making sure that you push that part. So if there's a student that is aware of that ahead of time, you can absolutely declare learning support on applications. And when I say that to US advisors, they're like, oh, absolutely not. We know that that would hurt their admissions decisions. And that baffled me. That doesn't happen internationally. If somebody declares a learning support need or any kind of disability on an application, that has nothing to do with their admissions decision and has everything to do with how we can support that student once they're here. The example that I gave often is when I was at Bangor, we had a blind student apply to the School of Music, and he was accepted, and that whole department retrained on special software. That student was allowed to come early with their guide dog so they could get from their dorm down to the classroom and learn how to navigate that path. So it's about preparing and ensuring that things are in place for the students before they arrive. It has no decision on their application decision, no weight on their application decision. For international student support, like I said, there's airport pickup and tours and things like that, but there's also financial support for budgeting, finding jobs, looking over contracts for housing if they want to live in private accommodation, extending visas and helping support that. And then clubs and societies are lifebloods of British institutions, really similar to US institutions. I think I signed up for like 30 clubs when I first came over here. And then you have this have a go week, which I loved. Like you get to have a go at rowing, have a go at horseback riding. So I tried a bunch of stuff and I ended up signing up for 2 clubs. And that's how I met my group of friends. And I immediately wasn't just the American, I was Maggie the rower, Maggie the choir singer. And it was really fun to kind of meet a group of people outside of my academics and get involved in that. Institutions will also have a lot of career support and continuing support with CVs and interview practice and things like that. But again, you have to advocate for those things. So it's not a class offered in your courses, it's reaching out and finding those things. Now, the kind of student that is successful in the UK is certainly an independent student that is able to adapt, not judge, be okay with, these unique situations. I had to learn to call things different and not weird, open to these opportunities, willing to take these healthy risks, and just looking for a more affordable option in a different college experience. They do need to be informed. They do need to know what they want to study. And I have to say they've got to be like self-disciplined. When I'm advising students, like my clients applying to the UK, we start there. So like our first session is me telling them how I work with them. And so much of the onus of just the 2 of us working together is on them, because they really need to be able to do that when they get to the UK. You're not going to have a pop quiz in the UK to see if you did the reading. They're going to assume that you did the reading. They're going to assume that you read a footnote or 2. They're going to assume that you fell down a rabbit hole and watched a couple of extra YouTube videos or found some other resource that you're going to bring into a classroom discussion. So there's not this hand holding to ensure the student is going to be okay. There's a challenge almost, like not cruelly, very much rise to the occasion, but the student needs to self advocate. They need to show up, first of all, because visa requirements demand attendance, so you have to go to class. But also, they need to engage with the class. The more you put into it, the more you get out of it. So, just making sure that that student is very switched on doesn't mean that they need to be the best in the class. They just need to show up, be passionate and organized. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now, but I feel pretty strongly about that. Okay, so oh, and I should also say academic structure. Academic structure, there's seminars and there's lectures. So I think you often hear about the British system with lectures, and people just picture these like Oxbridge, massive lecture halls with 150 people in it. And that does happen. It never happened for me. My department was really small, but it did happen with like our psychology department. That was 500 students. Each class was between 150 to 200 students. So their lectures were massive. But the point is for a lecture for everybody to hear the same information and then break into your seminar groups of 15 to 25 people to discuss what you heard in the lecture. So yes, there are some lectures, but they're not meant to be interactive. They're meant to be receptive. And then you bring that into a discussion-based seminar and labs and things like that. And that's where you have the smaller one-to-one. Most of my lectures were 40 people. Most of my seminars were 10 to 15. I actually had one seminar that was one-to-one, which was terrifying, but I learned a lot. And I learned a lot about, confidence and speaking up for myself. But usually I would say in undergrad, you're going to be looking at the 15 to 25 class size. Okay, should I take a break? Christina, Melissa, are there any questions I should tackle before going into the application discussion?
There are questions in regards to entry requirements, American student profile, and also if you could talk about foundation programs.
Sure. Okay, and I'm going to open up the chat so I can scroll through that a little bit.
And that stuff might come later in your presentation, I'm sure, as well.
Foundation programs doesn't, so I'll touch on that real quick. Foundation programs are for students that need the +1 year or English language support. So English language support, it depends on the university, but most of them are going to be accepting the English language tests that you would expect. TOEFL is getting back on the map, but it's pretty much IELTS and Cambridge English. And Duolingo is starting to climb up the accepted tests as well. So if they don't meet the program requirements for English, then there are lots of foundation programs for 6 weeks, for 3 months, for 6 months, for 12 months. So they can do that and then step into their program. And they would have visa support to have the visa that gives them that time before their course begins to get into those. It is a separate application process, but it's usually on your offer letter. So if you're offered admission to the university, but you need to complete a 3-month foundation course in English, then it would tell you how to go about doing that. So here's your next step. If it's foundation for academics, there are a number of foundation providers either attached to universities or independent that then feed into universities. And if there's a student accepted to, like, say, York University, they either have their own foundation or they would have a list of providers that they could suggest for that student to go to and then progress into the programs at York. So they would have kind of an agreement of how to step from A to B. And those programs usually tend to be a year. Think of it as 13th grade. And they tend to be a top up for the students that haven't met the minimum entry requirements. And then depending on their results at the end of the foundation year, they would step into. So it's kind of like a conditional offer. When you apply to a UK university, you get either a rejection or a conditional or unconditional offer. If you get a rejection, absolutely query that. Ask why. That's fine, totally normal. No one will take offense or be upset by that. And sometimes it's down to just not understanding entry requirements. So I had a student that was enrolled in a dual enrollment program in Washington State, and my university didn't realize that that was a community college. They saw dual enrollment and didn't know what that meant. So then I just had to explain that's a community college, that is a higher level course that is equivalent to our, whatever it was in the UK at that time. And then they were accepted unconditional. So sometimes it just takes an explanation. Often the conditions, if you get a conditional offer, often the conditions are just graduate with a certain GPA, and it depends on what you want to study. If that GPA is like a 3.0 or 3.5 or 3.8, unweighted. Um, so it's usually just graduate. There's not a ton on that. Sometimes it will say you need to have 5 APs with a score of 5, like sometimes they might make that requirement. The UK is much more test flexible than they were 5 years ago because of COVID. So there is a lot more test optional, test flexible. But if you're looking at the applied sciences or the Russell Group institutions, which are the high rated research institutions, they will still require APs. This is the fight I've been fighting for a decade or so. All of Wales is now more flexible because I fought hard for that one. But we know a lot of institutions do not offer APs, but they don't necessarily clock that yet. So they are still looking for APs. And for them, it's an easy way to weed out too many applications. So there are a few institutions that flat out will not consider an applicant without APs. Isn't that handy to know ahead of time though? Because I had a student that was interested in a specific university. They told me, no, we won't consider them, don't care how good their grades are. So it was off the list. So that's what I mean about the 5 UCAS application spots. Like by the time we got to application, we didn't have to worry about that one, off the list. Don't consider it anymore. So try to have your clients not fall in love with a single institution. It's hard with the students that are keen and focused on Oxbridge and things like that. This is what they want. But, our job is to help broaden that opportunity and show them a few other choices as well. This is what happens when you ask me a question. I go off on crazy tangents. So there's that one. Let me scroll through these real quick. Entry requirements. I can't really give you like clear entry requirements because they're not just different from university to university, they're different from program to program. So my example is when I was working for Bangor, we were looking for a 3.0 minimum GPA, 1250 on SATs, a 26 and above on ACT, and oh God, this is getting the cobwebs off, a 28 and higher on the IB, I believe. And that sounds really low. I'm just saying those were the bare minimums. So if you didn't have that or one of those or some combination of those, then we wouldn't be able to consider it. Once you kind of pass that one, and the UK is very much focused on tick boxes of, yep, we've got those. Now let's look at the next criteria of tick boxes. Then we would look at the transcript. And I'd be looking for GPA, I'd be looking at the level of the courses that you took, and I'd be looking at what grades you got in the courses similar to what you want to study at university. That's really important. So each UK university is going to have a US champion. Again, I'm talking like it's just for the US. It depends where your students are coming from. But if they're coming from the US, the university is going to have a rep that deals with US students. They can often be your champion. So it is worth developing that relationship. Using a UK specialist to introduce you to that person, to build that bridge, because that's the person that can look at the transcript, tell you yes or no, but also the person that can fight your corner. So as an example, I had a student, who had a 2.7 GPA in his senior year, but his dad passed away his sophomore year, and he had failed things like chemistry and physics, and he wanted to study English literature. So we're able to go into the application and say, look, he's taking AP English. He got an A. He got this score on the subject test because back then there were subject tests. And we're able to kind of fight the corner and get the student enrolled for that course based on that. So if you have them on site, it's not about like making sure they get in. It's about making sure that they're qualified. So we're able to kind of pick and choose depending on the institution for things like that. So I mean, they care if you're involved in clubs and societies and presidents and things like that, but that is not going to make or break any British university decision. It's going to be academically focused more than anything else. So they're going to be looking at the GPA, they're going to be looking at the level and the weight of the programs that they've taken. If they're looking at applied sciences, then they absolutely need to have some APs and high scores on AP exams or university level courses. In those areas, but even university level courses, a lot of institutions won't necessarily accept those. So it just depends what they want to study and how they present that information to them. Okay. Is it possible for a prospective student to meet with a rep when visiting university? Yes, absolutely. So most universities will have tours available, and they'll have independent reps that you can reach out to and set up meetings with. But it's not like the US where it's like tours are Wednesday at 1. You have to do it one at a time with those reps. So just making sure that you reach out to that person and that they're in the country and that they're available. And if they're not there, they will usually try to find somebody for that student for when they do come. Okay.
I
Shall I
think there
pause?
are just some questions about entry requirements, and they are clearly posted on most university websites.
Yeah.
Like that is one of the um, best parts, I think, of the UK. And even when I'm advising students for the US, I will look at the UK because it's clear to say, okay, well, for this course at this King's College London, you may need to take this level of math and get a 5 in your AP. Or so there is a lot of guidance along what are the entry requirements
Yeah.
for the courses on UCAS or on the websites.
Yeah, and if you just Google that, the name of the university and USA requirements, you'll almost always find a pretty clear criteria, but it's also a fairly limited criteria. So if your student doesn't match that, it's worth querying what they are looking for, sending the transcript over if they are keen on that. And yeah, they are used to IECs reaching out. IEC, like terminology in the UK is still very new, and I've been saying that for 10, 15 years. So I would just say that you're an advisor. It's just the easiest terminology to use with most British institutions. They are very, very familiar with the agent framework, and obviously we don't use that in the US, and that can be really problematic in the US. So we use the term consultant, but they don't really understand the nuance between consultant and college counselor. So, and college counselors don't want to be seen as consultants for obvious reasons. So just making sure that don't get caught up in that. Just be like, I'm an advisor. I'm working with a US student. I have this question, and they would love to help you out. I mean, their main purpose is to help the US students come on, or help any international student come onto their campus. So it's in their best interest to work with you to find a solution there. Okay, let me run through some of these bits. So as I said with applying, you can apply directly via UCAS. And these slides are from a presentation I did for UCAS at NACAC in September. So any questions on this, you can certainly connect with me, and I can connect you with the UCAS reps. They are changing a few things this year that have caused mild panic in advisors' lives, but there's no need to panic. It did not change that much at all. So I'll make sure I cover that. So the emphasis is pretty heavy on academics and qualifications. And the two things I really did want to mention are personal statements and references. Personal statements, I'll go into how you construct those, but those are very important. They need to answer specific questions. They are like a cover letter to a CV on a job application. They're not about summer camp or your relationship with your mother. They are very much about your academic ability, your understanding of what you are signing up for, the field that you are considering getting into, and the preparation that you've done for that area of study. Similarly, references. UCAS only requires one reference. You can absolutely send additional references, but they would go directly to the university. So you would find the international at email address, international at bangor.ac.uk, and you would attach the supporting references from that teacher that knows you really well or from your guidance counselor. Those would go separate to the individual university reps. The single reference on your UCAS application needs to be somebody who can speak to your ability in the academic field that you're engaging in. So if this person wants to study chemistry, it absolutely needs to be a university or AP or very high level chemistry teacher. We need to see somebody in that field say this person is good, they are focused, they are working hard, they are achieving, they will be fine in a UK system. There is a certain amount of work that I do with referees as well, that you can kind of help prep them because it is a very different system. They are often the ones asked, if it's not a UCAS hub school, they are often the ones asked for predicted grades and things like that, and they have no idea what that means. So guiding them through that, making sure they're aware of what's going to be asked of them, and I make the student do a lot of that grunt work and prep work. So getting them involved, handing them exactly what the teacher is going to need to supply, For example, I did this internship. As you know, I worked hard in this course and got this grade. So making sure that the teacher is really informed on the specifics of how that student is qualified. Personal statements, references, and transcript. Those are the three main things that we're looking for on applications. When you're applying as well, just be aware sometimes, like we have deadlines. I think I have this on the next, no, in one of these slides. Deadlines are pretty similar to the US for general submission, I would say, and they're the middle of January for UCAS applications. The nice thing is you can continue submitting after that. So you can actually apply until July or August. As long as there's spaces on those programs, they are still accepting applications. So I encourage my students to get their applications in January. But if you have final year students that are still looking for opportunities and different options, this is still open to them. They could still apply now for a September start at UK institutions. They might find out within 24 hours if they've been accepted or not. Now, when I say that to American advisors, they like, what? No way. I don't trust that. But it's very legit. That's possible. When I was working at Bangor, we basically had approval for about 170 of the 200 courses that we offered because I'd already met with my admissions teams at different departments, knew what their criteria was. It was all in a spreadsheet. So I could literally take an application, review it. As long as that student had what we needed, I could issue the offer myself. So with some institutions, it could be as quick as 24 hours. With others, it's usually 3 to 6 weeks to get a response for acceptance, unconditional, conditional, or a rejection. UCAS is the main way to apply. I tend to push UCAS because it's just a very clear, simple system. But as I said, you can go direct if you're only applying to one institution, or you can also do Common App. Technically, you should not do UCAS and Common App. You should not use Common App to give yourself additional spaces. I'm just going to leave it at that because that's what you're supposed to say. You shouldn't do that. Just pick one route and stick to that platform. UCAS is very straightforward. There are some different terminologies, so it can get a little bit confusing, but they are an incredible resource themselves. They have a chat that is manned, I want to say 24/7, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And they have a lot of YouTube videos and guidance on how to complete a UCAS application. So students can make no more than 5 choices during the main cycle and no more than 4 choices in any one of medicine, dentistry, vet medicine, or vet science. You can only choose one of Oxford or Cambridge, and that has an early application of October. So if you have an Oxbridge student, they can't apply to both. They need to choose one or the other, and that is a different application system. There are separate testing if they want to do applied sciences, medicine, things like that, and that needs to be submitted by October. And then when they submit, they list their choices and preferences of institutions, but that's invisible to the university. They just see the application, make a decision, and go from there. So what's changing for next year? Not much. Basically, beforehand, they were just asking for 4,000 characters maximum, personal statement, go forth and tell us stuff. Now they're prompting. That's really all it is. So they're just changing how they're asking for different information. So why are you applying? Do you relate to your studies? Why are you interested? Why will you be great? And it is a bit of a tick box, making sure you answer these questions, but doing it in such a way that it really pushes why you're such a good candidate for this role. So making sure they cover any independent research that they've done. Do they read journals for fun? Are they aware of what people are talking about in the field? No one is expecting an 18-year-old to be an expert, but they are expecting the 18-year-old to know what they're getting into. So did you do some work placement? Did you do an internship? What courses did you take that really piqued your interest? Was it a conversation with a teacher or somebody in the field that really showed you that you want to pursue this? So making sure that they're aware of what they're getting into and that they're prepared for it. So showing passion, evidencing skills, and communicating interest, linking to extracurriculars. Again, not highlighting, it shouldn't take up a ton of word count to your extracurriculars, but if you can say, my leadership position in the drama club really showed me how to do time management, that can relate back to how that can make you successful as a student. at their institution. And then making sure that you explain what you have learned, why it's important, and including that element in the application can really be the moment where the student gets to be a bit more personal and say, I do really want to do this. I am a well-rounded student. I am aware of what I've done, but here's why I'm going to be okay. And that's really what institutions are looking for. And then I do have a self-promotion bit here at the end. I do a lot of co-counseling and collaboration. So think of me as a specialist consultant, like you would work with an arts, drama, or athlete consultant, that I tend to take over the UK applications for consultants while they manage the in-country or US specific ones, wherever you're based. And that can be, separate, but we talk to each other, or it can be a comprehensive package built in, and a very clear model that we follow. So it's as easy for everybody as possible, and the student understands, what our roles are. So I certainly welcome that. I love being able to offer this option to students, and to IECs and to advisors. It's not for every student. I started my undergraduate life pre-med. I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. Things change, people. How many of us advised pre-med students that change their minds? So, it's not for every student. Some of us need liberal arts. That's fine. But I'm really glad I found it for grad school, because then I could focus specifically on English literature for 1 year, get my master's, focus specifically on my PhD work. I took 5 years to do it, but I only paid for 3. You could just take write-up years. So I did. But yeah, so there's real benefits to kind of having that option available to you once you know what you want to do. So I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to open the questions, and then I really welcome any conversation that we would like to have. And Melissa and Christine, if there's something in specific that you think I should address first, please give me a shout.
Maybe just as I think that kind of managing the chat, I think there's some people that are really new to maybe haven't advised a student on UCAS or the UK, or maybe are have maybe one or two. So where do you, a question I think would be helpful for the group is, where would you start? Where would you suggest they could go after this session and learn a little bit more and kind of play around?
I would start with UCAS. The UCAS website is a lot of information. So don't drown, just pick a thing and start to look at it. You might even want to start with the UCAS YouTube channel, because they have bite-sized videos about how to write a statement, how to fill out the application, how to consider which course you're interested in. And then once you go to the website, so when I work with a student, I'm figuring out what they're interested in. Our first session is just a lot of conversation. What do you want to study? Why do you want to study it? Sometimes that takes 2 or 3 sessions, depending on how well they know what they want to do. And then I go to UCAS and I go through the search. So then my goal is to create a long list of options of universities for them to start working through. So I'll sift out the ones that they aren't qualified for, or if they hate cities, whatever their criteria is, and build a list from UCAS, which will give you hundreds of courses. Like if you just type in English literature, you're going to get 2,000 courses. There's only 168, I think, universities in the UK, but at each of these institutions, you can study English literature and film, English literature and history. So it's like a double major. But that gives you a lot of different options to choose from. So when you start scrolling through the programs, just finding those universities and being like, all right, I want you to look at Lincoln, York, Leeds, I build a list of 20 to 30. And then I have the student go through that and turn it into a traffic light, red, yellow, green. Which ones are you considering? Which ones aren't you considering? Why? And then we get it down to about 20. And then I go through it and start to say, well, this one's going to ask you for this one's going to ask you for that, and then take it back to them. We go through entry requirements. Then we're down to about 15. Once we've got entry requirements, we go down to contacting university. So you just start to whittle it down as you go. But if you're just overwhelmed by all the things, start with UCAS. Just engage in those 3-minute videos. Even if you want to engage in the study in Wales stuff, back in the day during COVID, I made tons of videos just about how UK education works. There's a lot of resources out there that are very helpful for just kind of baselining. And then once you get to the higher level of engagement, reach out to me, reach out to other specialists, or play around with UCAS. They do training sessions as well. There's also a British Council who I worked for the last year. British Council does an agent training certification, but we have worked with them to change that to an advisor training certification. So the advisor training certification is at your own time. It is completely free. It can take a long time. I would say like, I don't know, 2 weeks is probably the fastest you could do it. But it tends to be a few more weeks than that. It is pretty intense, but then you have a certification from the British Council that you're an advisor. So that's a really good training of just how to engage with the field. But anyway, I'll pause for a breath.
Um, yeah, I guess I would just one thing I would say as a counselor working globally with students in the US and abroad is the mindset your student needs to have first with the UK is what course of study drives that conversation.
What area of
What
study?
area of study? Like,
Yeah,
and I also like to use the search bar on UCAS for students to look at different course combinations and
yep,
what would they really, what is, okay, you're interested in business, but are you interested in, what does that mean? And explore business management or business psychology, again, for not just the UK, but also globally to gain more information.
and a different kind of coursework too. So you have your really traditional institutions where you are going to study film theory and film studies and film fill in the blank with a lot of research. But then you also have practitioner-based universities that are very hands-on and give you a camera and it's creative practice. So like, what's the difference there? Finding the fit, and that's just film. That absolutely works in the hard sciences as well. Was that institution always a research-based place or was it an industry-based place? So kind of finding the fit there. I do see a hand with Ida, if you'd like
Yeah,
to.
go ahead. Just unmute yourself if you all have questions.
Oh, great. Thank you. Hi, my name's Ida. I'm based in San Diego, California, but I help students internationally. I actually studied in the UK myself. I went to an IB school in Tanzania. That's my complicated background. Um, so I put in the chat that I showed up in Cambridge straight from Heathrow with two suitcases and no idea where to go back in 2001, which ages me. But I'm just so happy to see that there's like these options now of airport pickup and tours and like where to buy your peanut butter and everything. Because
Right.
it took me 2 weeks to get a bike to be able to set up a bank account all on my own, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, my question is about the culture of studying and the curriculum, because in my experience, UK university studies are very much that lecture, seminar, practice essays, and then it's like all about the finals, right? Whereas my partner is a lecturer at UC San Diego, and there are all these group projects and little quizzes and like tiny little parts that end up adding up to your grade. And then students can like negotiate and come to office hours and dispute their grades, which was a complete no-no in the UK. So, how do you advise students in understanding the differences
Sure.
in the culture of learning and grading
Yeah.
and be prepared for what it's potentially like, how different it can be in the UK?
Thank you for your question and for your experience. I came over in 2003 and had a similar experience. So it was a lot of me working for the office in 2007 with three other people in a similar boat to be like, we need to change the support. It has definitely changed UK wide now, though. So the preparation question, you're the third person to bring this up to me this week, and it's only Tuesday, right? So I'm starting to think maybe I need to offer a prep course for students coming to the UK the summer before they arrive of just expectation setting and preparation. Because my first grade when I started studying here was a 56, and I nearly died because I'm a AB student, you know? So like anything under an 80 was absolutely absurd and not able to consider. A 56 was a fail. Well, no, in the UK system, especially at that time, the 56 was not a great grade, but it wasn't a fail either. So I had to learn the grading scale. And that is changing as well. There are more letter-based institutions. They are working a little bit more off of a 100-point scale, but there's still this shock of different systems, different writing styles, different expectations. certainly the focus on the final exams. There are more smaller projects than there used to be, but it is still nothing compared to the US system. So a lot of mine were essays. I was literature based. Arts and humanities is going to be maybe a final exam, but for the most part, I had 4 essays to turn in over the course of a semester. And 2 of them were shorter and 2 of them were long. So it just depended on what that course was. But I could also submit them when I was done. So I could submit before Christmas and not have to worry about studying over Christmas break. Um, but if it is that exam based and not having pop quizzes and not having the smaller things, that is a lot of pressure on a single event. There's a ton of preparation that does lead up to that. Professors will make themselves available. They will always read drafts ahead of time, but they will not offer that. You need to ask for that. So there is this advocate element that really continues to show up. There are writing centers in the UK. I really wish I had read more examples of British essays before I submitted my first essay, because there's small differences between the US and the UK style, but they are really quite significant as well. So learning that was quite the big learning curve. Um, they also do often have the luck. I'm trying to think of specific examples. There, most courses in the UK, the first year is not going to academically count for their overall grade. It does count. When I say that to Americans, they go, woohoo, free. No, 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 no. You have to do well to progress. You do have evaluations to progress, but that just means that they're giving you this grace year to figure out, to find your feet. And then starting in the second year, the grades count. So it depends on the program and institution. I don't want to make that blanket statement that every university does that, but you do have that flexibility, support, understanding that you are in a new system and you have a lot to learn. Even if you're an excellent student, you still have to learn like the machine of the institution, right? And how to submit things and fit within that. So I feel like you've just added to my need that I might offer this preparation course to students in the future.
Awesome. I just want to say thank you so much. And actually, about the differences in essays, I was a TA at the London School of Economics when I was in grad school there, and we had a lot of US exchange students, and they were in tears
Yeah.
with getting that 63% on their
Yep.
first essay and not understanding how to write the essays. It is definitely a different structure,
Yep.
and I think there would be a huge need for that. Awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, specific course. Commenting on Jennifer's comment in the chat, underscore enough what Maggie's saying about researching and narrowing by course. Yeah, I mean, the course is the thing that I think can be the most difficult thing. I mean, the clients that I work with, none have ever come to me. I don't think ever come to me undecided. So if somebody came to me undecided, I would struggle, unless they were a sophomore, maybe a junior. I would struggle to work with them seriously because they have a lot more work to do before they're ready to think about UK. It's not impossible, but they need to really spend time on it. So the number of students that have finished high school and then do a year working and community college classes and then apply to the UK, that has grown exponentially. A lot of students will also do 1 year at a US institution and then transfer, which means they don't have to worry as much about the entry criteria because they have that higher level study. But that's also a very expensive way to do your first year. I mean, I really do push the 1 or 2 university classes, or 3 or 4 if you're looking at applied sciences and a higher level university level, but it can be online courses. It just needs to be accredited at a certain level to make sure that it ticks that. But that student needs to come to you with a pretty clear understanding of what they want to do, or where they want to study. That doesn't mean, like I said before, I've just worked with a student who wanted to do tourism or history. Well, those are two really different things when you're thinking about only 5 choices on an application. So talking through that, going through individual programs and saying, okay, well, this course you can do this course you can do that. It did help to kind of talk through what he liked, what he didn't, and he didn't know yet. So it took a lot of time to kind of sift through that. But the other benefit you get with UK education is if it's something as small as that, a lot of the final essays and your third year final project tends to be very self-led on a topic that you come up with your supervisor. So those smaller essays and your final essay can be about what you love. So if you're taking like a cathedral music class like I took, well, I got to find the element that I wanted to investigate. And my area has always been audience engagement and things like that. So it's like, how do you want to connect to your audience? How do you want that to play with them? And doing some research into fan and audience engagement and different kinds of learning structures with music education and like all this stuff I had never considered before. But with my supervisor, I was able to kind of navigate that, fall upon a subject that I was able to investigate, and take that through. So that was just one class on my semester abroad. For full undergraduate students, they have a whole second semester of their third year project that they're working on specifically in their passion area. And the idea is that they do finish with a lot of specific knowledge of that, but that they could also step straight into a master's in a field that they now know a fair bit about, feel fairly confident about, are aware of, and probably have had some work experience because it's just built into UK degrees.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to mention too, like the hardest part, I think, for us as parents and advising Anna, um, was when it came to graduation, right? Like, what do you do next? And so I do talk to I work with also with Americans who are interested in UK, and I do talk to them a lot about be prepared for the end point. You really do need to be thinking that far ahead, which is hard, right, for those kiddos to do that. But it was hard for us because we really like had to deal. She's a twin. Her twin went to SMU, so we were dealing with completely different situations when it came to the culture around, you know, careers and
Mm.
working. So that's another conversation that I think would be super helpful.
I'll note that down. That is a really strong one because again, a lot of those resources that do exist at UK institutions are a lot easier to access while you're there. Once you leave, it's a little bit harder to access career advising and CV review and things like that. You can still do it, of course, but it is different, so being able to
Yeah.
tap into that. Right now, you do
Yeah.
also have the post-study work visa, so students doing graduate work in the UK can
Yes.
stay up to
Yeah.
two
My daughter
years.
has that now. She
Yeah,
has it. She's in London. She has that now.
and there's no limitations on the salary right now. That's probably going to change with the next government. So they're talking about a pretty massive cap, but
Yeah.
governments, man, we'll see where they go. But being aware that there are some options in country if they want to stay and have that experience, but being aware that there's a transition, when you go back. One of the other things I did want to mention with that transition and what's next, we have also had a lot of students that have come to the UK for medicine and law. But it's very difficult to study a medical degree in the UK. Very rare that an American or even most international students would get accepted onto a UK medical course. But they would very much be considered for an undergraduate course in biomedical science or human physiology or healthcare sciences or healthcare management. So they can do a bachelor's course and then they'll apply to med schools back in the US while also applying to master's programs in the UK. Those are only 1 year. So if they don't get into medical school, they're applying to a 1 year master's program in the UK. They're upping their ante, they're applying the following year with a master's. So that's been a growth area as well. And then law, there are a number of states in the US. I'm going to be hard pressed to name them. I'm pretty sure it's New York, Pennsylvania, and California, but I think there's another one too. That if you get your law degree in the UK, you can sit the bar in those states in the US, and that's an undergraduate degree. So after 3 years, you can sit the bar in those states. And then if you pass the bar there, you can then sit in a different state. So that has been a growing area of interest as well. And like every 18-year-old, a lot of these students will study law and then realize actually they're interested in fashion because of that paper that they did on the fashion law, area and then move into that field. Fine, great. You have an undergraduate law degree and then you have a master's in fashion merchandising and marketing. Great. That's going to be cool for you. So yeah, just making sure there's an open mind, but also an awareness of the different routes you can take. So I do encourage American students to apply for a master's, even if they're not going to go for it. It's free to apply to a master's in the UK. A lot of them are now included, so you can apply directly as an undergrad to a 4 year program, but it's a 3+1. So your visa would cover the entirety of the program. But if they don't know what they want to study, just go for the three and then apply for the one later if you want. Any other questions? Like I said, I'm very much available anytime. I like doing this, and it's been a long time since I've not been standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people at conferences talking about this stuff. So any opportunity where I get to kind of solve that problem for the individual student or the advisor, I quite like doing it. So do give me a shout